Last year, I think it was winter retreat, Venerable Chudron was teaching on karma, and she made a comment that I think caught a few of us by surprise. She said, "We don't purify afflictions, we purify actions." And so I've been thinking about this, and I think a penny has dropped, so check me and see if you find the same ideas to be agreeable. At UU, we've been going through the 10 non-virtues very slowly the last few weeks and trying to apply them to our lives, particularly in the context of the four opponent powers. So for the four opponent powers to make sense, you have to think about something to purify. So then we went back through the 10 non-virtues, and we were looking at where people draw the line with a particular non-virtue. So for instance, with killing, I think it's safe to assume that most human beings are not killing human beings. But where do we draw the line? Some people still enjoy sport fishing. What if you had a mouse in your house? Luckily, there are have-a-heart traps, so perhaps more and more people are using those. But what about cockroaches? Or what about termites? What about mosquitoes? Or flies, or spiders? Or lice? Or fleas on your pets? So these are difficult, aren't they? But we can just examine for ourselves, where do we draw the line? What's okay? What do we say, no, I'll never do that? So I was thinking about this in terms of the non-virtue of ill will or malice. And I remember when I first learned about malice or ill will, the complete path of action of malice or ill will, I thought, well, there's so many conditions, I never do that. And I didn't give it much attention. But lately I've been giving it a lot more attention. Because as we read through what is involved in a complete path of action, and also thinking about, well, what would be an almost complete path of action of malice or ill will, I think we might find that a lot of our anger falls in that category. So for instance, with ill will, the basis is another sentient being in whom you can engender hostility. In other words, you can make, or the other person can get angry. Phew, we can't generate ill will with Buddhas or beings who have completely overcome anger. The attitude can be any of the three afflictions. It can be driven by anger, attachment, or ignorance. And there's an intention or direct motivation to harm someone, either by saying hurtful words or by physically assaulting them or hitting them, tying them up, imprisoning them. I would go so far as to say closing our heart to somebody is a very violent act, when you ignore someone. So again, we have to check to see, well, where am I going to draw the line? It depends a lot on the motivation and the attitudes. The action or the performance is simply having such a thought. I will hurt them. I will make them suffer. Now, I'll bet nobody in this room would like to put up their hand to say, who in the last week or two has thought, I'm going to make that person suffer? But if we're honest, I think we'll all agree that there are these shades or these moments or these inclinations, these tendencies where we think, I didn't like that. I have to do something to retaliate, or maybe there's just a shade of that. Now, if anger arises in our mind and we don't do anything about it, we just notice it, we just observe it, then, that's like something that's ripening and it's finishing right there. But what's interesting to notice is what happens once it arises and how long do we indulge it before we become aware of, oh, that's actually anger in my mind, and look how I'm feeding it. So let's keep going. The action or the performance is simply having such a thought. I will hurt them. I will make them suffer. I will ignore them. I will shut my heart to them. We continue indulging in this kind of thought, and as it develops and increases, then malice becomes stronger and stronger. And then the culmination or completion is deciding to go through with harming that person and planning how to do it. So it's a mental activity, right? Now, luckily, it's only a complete path of action if 5 attitudes are present. And this is where I thought, well, I'm off the hook because I can't engage in these 5 factors. But let's have a look at them and see. So the first one is an attitude of anger or hatred that grasps firmly at a cause or reason why you want to harm a particular person. It necessarily includes exaggerating or projecting negative qualities onto the cause of our harm. Well, that happens every time there's anger in the mind, right? That's one of the qualities of anger, or at least the inappropriate attention or distorted attention that goes along with anger. So that one's there. A mind of impatience that cannot bear the harm that was done to us. Do you know that feeling? Oh, I cannot bear it. I have to do something. You know, it comes in all sorts of shades, doesn't it? Sometimes it's really strong. Sometimes it's just a wisp, a little, whisper in your ear. I can't stand that. I'm going to do something about it. So check. That's often there. Then a mind of resentment that arises from recollecting the harm that we think was done to us, that we perceived happened to us. Resentment, what is that? When you call to mind again and again. The person harmed us once, and we call to mind, even if we call to mind twice. Now we're the one who is increasing the anger in the mind. And then the fourth one is a mind of vengeance. Sometimes it's translated as an envious mind, which I have found confusing. But Geshe Sopa says a mind of vengeance, which thinks, how nice if this person were harmed or suffered. Oops, sometimes that sneaks in there, doesn't it? And then the last one is the mind is overcome with malice, oblivious to its disadvantages, without any personal integrity or shame, thinking I shouldn't be indulging in this, and without wanting to be free of its faults. Now, happily, most of the time, because, we've been practicing Dharma for a while, happily, most of the time, I can avoid checking that box. Because what I notice is that there's a struggle going on in my mind. If there's ill will in my mind, part of my mind is saying, I must do something about this insult, this injury. And there's another part of my mind saying, oh, wait a minute. You know too much about karma to just full-blown engage in harming this person. So how are we going to apply an antidote or, some kind of counteraction? So it's been interesting for me to observe, where do I draw the line with malice? And certainly there are so many beautiful teachings that we've all come in contact with about how to counteract anger and malice, ill will, resentment, those sorts of states of mind or mental factors, and the paths of actions that they influence. So I think a lot of our Dharma practice and our meditation practice in particular is about observing what's happening in our mind, just simply observing with a lot of curiosity, like, oh, isn't that interesting that I'm going over this incident for the third or fourth or fifth time? Isn't that interesting? I think I want to not do that, because right now I see that I'm the one harming myself. But look at the habit. Oh, here it comes again. And of course, different insults, and it depends on the person, it depends on the time, it depends on my state of mind. So many factors, so many conditions come into play that determine where I'm going to draw the line that day. So I find this to be quite an interesting exploration right now. And luckily, well, it depends. There are times here at the Abbey, for me, where there's more ill will in my mind, or it's more easily excited. There are times where it's not very present, and it's such a relief. And I think what got my attention was coming out of 8 days of teaching on Foundation of Buddhist Practice. My mind was quite calm, quite quiet, more quiet than usual. And an incident happened. And I won't go into the details, that's not important. But there was a perceived injury, and it was just fascinating to watch the struggle going on in my mind. And I got to the point where I was saying, this is ill will, and this will cause a lower rebirth, this will cause more ill will in your mind later on, this will cause being on the receiving end of ill will in the future if you do anything about it. You see, for a long time I thought, well, as long as I'm not speaking, and as long as I'm not acting, I'm safe. But now I see the error of my ways, that that's actually not true. As long as we are indulging anger in our mind and letting it run, we are creating a path of action. Whether it's complete or not, we have to examine for ourselves. But this helped me to match up the statement that Venerable made last winter in retreat. Because I was wondering, well, how do we purify anger then? If we don't purify afflictions, how do we purify anger? I think this is how we do it. How do we purify attachment? Purifying the complete passive actions or the incomplete passive actions of covetousness, etc. So, like a scientist, we can carefully observe how malice develops in our mind and how it brings nothing but trouble, really. How the mind gets heavy, obscure, vindictive, and how that then becomes the motivation for the passive actions of body and speech, or it can. So a few things that came to my mind that were really helpful for me. One was acknowledging that the initial injury only happened once, and that it was my mind that kept going back to it that was creating such a big deal. So that was helpful to see. And then I could say, well, I don't want to make this into a big deal. Why would I make myself suffer like that? And then I remembered this beautiful image, and especially with all the burning we've been doing here at the Abbey, you know, holding on to resentment is like holding on to a hot coal. Who does it harm first and foremost? Me. So I want to put it down. I reminded myself that this person was controlled by anger or jealousy or some other affliction. I don't know what. I don't know what the motivation was, and it's really none of my business. My job is to work with my mind. You know, I used to feel like I had to process everything. When something happened, I thought, well, I have to talk to that person. We have to clear this up right away. And the longer I practice Dharma, and especially the longer I live at the Abbey, I think, you know, that's not really necessary. What's most important is for me to look at my own mind, let it go on, not such a big deal. So I could have when I thought in this way, and I could recognize this person in that moment was not in control of her mind, then I could begin to develop some compassion. Like, I know what that feels like. I've been in that position, so I can have some compassion. I don't want her to suffer. I want her to be free of suffering. I remembered the powerful verse from Shanti Deva's text that says, I must have caused similar harm to other sentient beings, and so now this harm is being returned to me. I find that really helpful. It's sobering, and it just brings me right back to, okay, where do I need to work? More attention to the purification practice. And this thought actually allowed me to see that this person was actually helping me to exhaust some past negative karma. And I could begin to see this person as very kind. It was like, wow, it's nice when that happens. I could also see more clearly how this person was placing negative karmic seeds on her mind stream, and that unless she purified it, it would be a cause of suffering. So again, more fuel for developing compassion. And I remembered Lama Zopa Rinpoche's advice in Transforming Problems. There's one section that I really like. It's called the Heart Advice. And he says that even if someone is angry with us, by looking at them with loving kindness and compassion, we can still feel warm towards them. We can have affection towards them. And so that helped me to reduce the interest in sitting down and processing. You know, the part of my mind goes, I have to talk to this person. We have to clear this up right away. I have to understand what was going on in that person's mind. Nah, I don't have to be turned around by whatever's going on in that person's mind. I can just come back to, I'm choosing to think about this person with as much love as I can in this moment. And hopefully that love will continue. So I found this to be a really helpful exercise. And so I'd like to hear your comments about it maybe later, because it's already 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. Oh, I want to add one thing, if I can. Working with this particular incident has left a great feeling of satisfaction in my mind, because such experience contribute to the growing sense of self-confidence that I can work with whatever comes up in my mind. You know, we don't have to be a slave to the negativities in our mind stream, the afflictions in our mind stream. So I think this is one way that we build the self-confidence that overcomes that lack of self-confidence.